Oh boy. Hello, everybody. It is me, Emmerron, the host of this lovely podcast known as Wireheads, on our 48th episode this week. It's been a week in my personal life, in the life of the rest of America, and even the life of my local community. It's been wild. So there's a reason we did not have Wireheads last week. That was very personal. But we're back. And this week was Diamonds to lead. So if you have not come from her side of things already, down below in the description is a link that will take you to her first part of today's topic, which is lovely and ambiguous and simply called, in a very Art Nouveau way, the shape of the Night City skyline. We did talk a little bit about what that means in the first part of today's episode. If you are joining us on either Twitch here live, which we do every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. Pacific, or if you're joining us on Spotify as a listener of the full episode over there, you'll kind of know the explanation. For those of you who are watching this on YouTube, though, we are talking about what makes Night City Night City. How do you build community neighborhoods? How is that all written? How is that all kind of come together within the context of Night City? And as we're going to discuss in this half of the episode, when you start taking that out of Night City especially, what can that look like? You know, what would other cyberpunks kind of look like where that sort of question is made? So of course, joining me to answer this lovely ambiguous question and present this topic is my co-host.
Hello everybody, I'm Diamond Dust, netrunning VTuber. I'm mainly over on Twitch, and I'm doing some stuff for YouTube. Between, getting my Cyberpunk Red campaign back up finally. We are rolling, and in the throes of a bozo fight. With some inspirations from the Division 2 for choice of weaponry. Very large mallet. A very large mallet. But other than that, welcome. Especially for those of you guys who came from the other half. You kind of have an idea of what we're going to be talking about here. And something when Emmerron and I were, of course, trying to figure out what the second half of the episode, or like what today's episode was going to be, was what does our setting look like, and like the shape that it takes. And we kind of expanded out on this, that, maybe just beyond Night City, there's also a variety of other settings that we've seen as well. What in other forms of media, of course, we look to very popular cyberpunk references such as Neuromancer, or Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and in following suit, Blade Runner. Do we I'm trying to think what other ones off the top of our head. Pantheon's one of the, I would say, for those of you who are into cyberpunk, if you've not heard of Pantheon yet, because I think we've talked about it a little bit before. And see, this is the fun thing is Diamond has not seen season 2 yet. But I'm already just feeling
it's so good. Pantheon is such a good show. If you have not checked it out, we are not sponsored by them, but God, AMC knocked it out of the park with Pantheon.
And also I learned as Avatar: The Last Airbender was like one of my favorite series as a kid. These guys animated Pantheon, and just like the nostalgia, just wow.
It's very, very good.
But then also to other video games where we look at a variety of other genres that kind of are cousins to cyberpunk.
Yeah.
Where we look at such as like nanopunk. Cyberpunk's kind of like split down the middle between like old age cyberpunk and new age cyberpunk. It feels like.
It's kind of the joining. It's the joining tissue where the two meet, because yeah, you get some things that are very like futuristic cyberpunk, namely like FBCs, especially ones like the Copernicus and stuff like that, which feel like extremely futuristic. And then in the same breath, you get stuff like, you know, the Gunmart guns. You get rusted, weary, old cyber tech that is hanging on by a thread. You know, very much like gutter punk kind of reality, and it's where they meet that makes you know, the cyberpunk of canon a thing. So I suppose when we start talking about adjacencies, so in part one we talked a little bit about the idea of like a sparse cyberpunk and a very crowded cyberpunk, right? Like both of these show their face in Night City. Other cities throughout the country, when we talk about the US or the world at large, are going to have different levels of either of these, right? Or, you know, one like Chicago, for example, is probably going to fall hard into sparse. For those of you familiar, because I've just gotten Diamond and her wife into the Division 2 in a very, very big way. It's a game I spent a lot of my free time playing. It's very much, Chicago would look like that. It would look very like the world largely abandons it after a plague hits it. The people left behind are fighting over the scraps, and the few people that still have power hold it very carefully and wield it probably in service of their own agenda in the ashes of a once great city. Whereas in a place like Seattle that never really got touched by that, you're probably going to see it look a lot more of that crowded. I mean, in our modern timeline, it already is. You got a lot of vertical living, a lot of that like micro, like almost cube hotel living situation there, in high rises and things like that, that feel very cyberpunk already. That probably pretty logically would have not slowed down in the, you know, 20 or so years beyond current reality, even adjusting for like kind of the dark future timeline. So yeah, as we kind of talk about some of these alternatives, we are probably going to talk through them through the lens of other cyberpunk media, because I know we've already talked about a couple like of the big ones. In the first part we mentioned Blade Runner, we mentioned a little bit of things like Ready Player One, and so in this side of things we're going to talk about things that stretch that out a little further, and some other places you could look for inspiration if you wanted a particular feel for your setting or your environment, or like analogs near cyberpunk that might afford you some really good ideas for what that turns into. So
I suppose
please.
something else though, because some of this media that we are going to make references to, like, are we only going to be talking about like the physical space? Because like some of these virtual space is just as important as physical space.
Well, and I think
to a degree,
I think that any cyberpunk society you create is going to have elements of multiple. It's not going to be one or the other. It's going to be all. Because cyber, I mean, we know there are cities out there that in physical space would be dead quiet. And I mean that quite literally. They are dead,
oh yeah,
and they are quiet. And yet online there, they are thriving.
Hong Kong.
Hong Kong is the pretty much prime example of this. Yeah. So like, it's impossible to talk about what one would be versus the other. But you know, like it's impossible, I should say, to talk about how one would work without the other. We have to have both, because they both exist very, very intrinsically just within cyberpunk as like a whole. So I suppose to kind of kick things off with a sort of idea that would be kind of sparked in the idea of like cyberpunk adjacency here. Probably the easiest one to make that we haven't talked about yet is Mad Max.
Yes.
You play a Nomad campaign, you're basically playing Mad Max. There's a lot of those sort of, Nomad factions. There are different families that try to do different things. The Raf and Shiv are as varied as they are vicious. All of it in a battle over the resources and the rights to profit off of them that those factions definitely all occupy within the time of the Red. Like, that is the Nomad way now, is you're making the world work and stay connected despite how many other like systems and normal kind of ways of living have kind of fallen apart between the data crash and the Fourth Corporate War and all of the kind of following years of decline that the world experienced as a result of that. The Nomads are the one thing keeping it from falling into total destruction and implosion. So with that said, that would be somewhere like, I know my friend Robert right now is working on a Cyberpunk Phoenix setting that is deeply into like a Mad Max-ish nomad culture with like corporations are still there. Like there's still, the city is the city, but it is dominated by a lot of these other factions that occupy the outskirts of things. And because of just how big the desert is and how important those arteries connecting it are, inevitably there are going to be people that want to profit from the control of those areas.
Also, looking at like Mad Max for the matter of like just the area itself. If we look at like actual like cyberpunk with the big C, of course, the Aldecados are a bunch of folks from Los Angeles that, packed shit up and left because of a bunch of earthquakes that just rocked the city. And these guys are now like a dominating factor in, Night City, due to how important they were to the trade. So if you really want to do something along this, and I feel like Diesel Punk could possibly, no, not Diesel Punk. What's the word I'm looking for here? Because Diesel Punk, that's a lot more, I think, Wolfenstein. I'm trying to think what Mad Max falls under besides apocalyptic.
Yeah, I mean, it in some ways, we talked about Atom Punk. It meets in the middle with Atom Punk in a lot of like meaningful ways. It is very post-apocalyptic.
Yeah. For anyone who might be wondering what we mean by Atom Punk, this is like this is like society after the post-apocalypse and the bombs. In Fallout. Society after the vault doors open, but very much more like when we're writing stories or setting a world like this, resources are going to be very sparse, and more likely than not, it's either you are trying to make it to that next town where the resources are, or you are trying to get those resources off of someone else. It is, I feel like it would fall under a very sparse setting, but not like the same way street sparse is.
No, but it very much turns into like you deal with a lot of the tribalism that exists within nomad culture if you end up doing a setting like this. It also leaves you, though, a lot of creative freedom because, like, 1 week to the next, your crew could be moving through state lines and stuff like that. There's a little glimpse of this that we see in the Black Dog story that is written at the end of the Cyberpunk Core Rulebook. So, like, if you have an interest in doing something that kind of integrates and associates more with that, then that would be something that you could look at within the written cyberpunk canon that kind of goes to addressing elements of that. I would also recommend picking up a copy of Neo Tribes, which is a 2020 book, but it's very lore focused on what the different nomad nations are, what they do, how they operate with, respect to one another, what they value, what they don't. All of that is kind of there. It would give you a pretty rich kind of background and tapestry to like work within for your more canonically contained narratives that would fit that kind of campaign. So I suppose we talk about that. Diamond, what are some other what's another like media that you would kind of bring into play here that you maybe found inspiration from for your cyberpunk gigs before?
So for my cyberpunk games, not quite there, but not quite there in the way of like physical size or sheer volume of it. But my wife introduced me to this book called Snow Crash. I Kay, if you're listening or if you're watching, I am working on it. I'm getting through it. Trust me, I'm getting there.
And I'm staring over at my copy on my shelf right now, and I'm like, I need to read that.
So Snow Crash is when we look at a lot of cyberpunk cities, it's pretty fair to assume we always think towers spiring up into the air. Sort of like whether you see it in like Deus Ex or Cyberpunk with the big C. What other like insert any cyberpunk films that involve tall spiring towers and all that. Snow Crash is what happens when corporations can just buy up land and just like go. And so the entire interstate, I think it's like the I-9 or I-5 stretch of California is just covered in these like suburbs that are like owned by franchises. And it's just this constant glow as you go down the interstate of just neighborhood after neighborhood after neighborhood that are all ran by their own corporations. And everything is set to, everything needs, and anyone who works for these groups has to follow this 3-ring binder to a T, or else bad things happen. Snow Crash really paints a spot where there's just absolutely no government regulation. Like it is on the physical side. Now on the digital side, which is something I found impressive, that we end up actually developing here in real world time, and actually how I met my wife. Snow Crash also takes part in the internet, in basically virtual space, where you are throw on a headset, get into an avatar, and get out there. And our pro tag even was part of founding a club there. And people run businesses, have their lives entirely on the net. And we see that language is important in here, being of certain cultures is important here, and also you can die while on the net just like you can in the real world. And it is a constant the book constantly switches back and forth between the two, showing what's happening on either side of that veil. And Snow Crash, like that net that we see is a bit like the net that we see in Cyberpunk 2020, where you could literally be over in the Russian network for, be over to Russia and back and never have to leave your couch, or things along that line. But like the Third Corporate War to that case. However, at the same time, on the physical side, like I said, every neighborhood's divided. Everything's franchised. We don't have the massive corporations. It's franchises. The corporations, assign people out to do this, and I feel like Continental Brands is a really good analog to this, where I imagine those oases have very specific ways they're supposed to do things, or bad shit happens.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know kind of which is the more correct view of the Oasis, because I don't know that Oases are franchised. I think that they are all owned directly by the corporation.
Oh, they are. That's right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But you could see a world though in which, I mean, instead of franchising the location itself, probably, I mean, you've got a broker with Continental to get kibble. And that is probably something where they expect cool, independent bodega owner number 5, you want to carry our kibble? Very cool. Sign this long ass licensing agreement to do that. And it becomes its own kind of hell, right?
Snow Crash does tell that story of gritty, street fights, bureaucratic hell, and also the danger on the net.
Yeah.
And what I like about the way Snow Crash's net pans out is you are and it's something that's you if you talk to folks that are lifers in VR chat, and for my, folks like my wife and I would say I'm so much a lifer compared to my wife. My wife has had a lot more experience with VR chat than I have, where you will have a reputation on the net that you might not have IRL, and your friend circles and your personalities may be two very different people depending on where you are. And it is a situation with Snow Crash of, you're basically carrying two different lives in two different worlds. The net space is massive. It continues on indefinitely. IRL is a continuous city. It's a spread of franchise after franchise after franchise of owning this neighborhood or this neighborhood or this neighborhood.
There's another fiction series that kind of rubs against that philosophy, although I will say that the societal implications of it are a little different, because they do kind of tie your identities together. There's a series, the first book, and it's called Epic. I believe the second one is Saga. I was introduced to these back when I was a freshman in high school. And the idea is that in a far future where Earth has been abandoned, colonists recolonized a new planet, and some of the things that they sort of in a weird sort of living time capsule sense took with them. One of them was an MMO. And that MMO has turned into the way that they deal with socio-political disputes and things like that. They lean into things like PvP and things like that to resolve disputes and arguments, rather than letting them fester over into physical conflict. And so in that world, it feels a little closer to more like a Ready Player One, where one day a person comes along who decides, because of the way that this game is turned into a very you have to play it a particular way if you want to get ahead at life, right? How many of us look at the what has historically been a very successful upbringing where you're like, okay, yeah, first you go through high school, then you go to college, then you get a job, then you make a career of it. And so when you tie playing a game and you gamify your kind of social progress that way, and like really lean into that as like the main aspect, there's a very like stratified way that someone like will build a character and like do certain things, and they play it very safe because the currency in the game reflects their wealth in real life, and this means that if that character dies and loses their wealth, it's especially problematic. So one day the main character decides to play their game a little differently. They build someone who is entirely in the game world based on charisma and like their looks rather than their strength or dexterity or any of that. And all of a sudden they unlock this whole side path in the game that like no one has seen, at least in the modern day. And it totally changes how the game is viewed by the society and how it kind of interfaces back. And it's very interesting from that sort of like, yeah, more like a net punk kind of thing where you're looking at it through the, like, the net and digital spaces are the more focal element of your story. And obviously though, I mean, we both have done elements of this through Elflines Online. There are plenty of avenues by which you can tell a story like that in Cyberpunk, even as it's written, because of just how well fleshed out those spaces are. And it's more about like defining how that culture interfaces against the Edge Runner culture that you are so much more encouraged to like look at when you look at like real people doing real things. There's an element of that kind of blends in the mix there.
All right, but yeah, like, so yeah, so with Netpunk and the way Snow Crash works out, it's very much one of those where like life, like when I've seen it, life is kind of normal.
Yeah,
almost normal, too normal. But also, like, I guess one of the things that really kind of set in for me is just like you have a couple of different franchises of jails. Like, wow, we don't have that. No, we have those.
We do.
Yeah.
We do. Privatized prisons are a thing.
What's the next media reference on the table, Emmerron? Knocking the ball back to your end of the court.
Yeah, I think that one that gets really easy to examine, it's another Cyberpunk game actually, which is Cyborg. So, if you want to dial up your Cyberpunk to the bleakest of bleak existences, that game, even just as reference material to then go back and build out like a regular interface, or not interface, interlock version of Cyberpunk, but told through the lens of a world that is like verging on collapse. Cyborg gives a really interesting look at what will probably very well one day become the logical conclusion of the Pondsmith Cyberpunk reality, which is very much the corporations become almost Ouroboros to themselves, where they are constantly eating their own tails. And when it comes into the people below them, everyone's in debt, soaked in the inability to really pay any of it off. Everything is privatized. There is no government save that sanctioned by the corporation around the corner. And all of this against a backdrop that is both cyberpunk as well as like a little bit of nano and biopunk, where weird things happen, mutations occur, no one knows quite why or how they happen, but they do know that the people who have them are very powerful. And so ultimately, that is something that serves as not just a great reference. The game itself is a lot of fun, especially if you're coming from like a D&D background, the dice system in there is going to feel very familiar to you. And it's a great way to kind of dip your toes into some of the thematic elements if you want to try out the theme of that world before you wholesale go for like Cyberpunk Red. Just be warned and be aware that it is, like I said, very bleak. The outlook in that world is not quite grim dark, but it verges in some places upon the grim dark. It is very, very like people have given up in a large way, and dystopia is everywhere. Literally, you have something, every character in it gets the gift, I use that word incredibly loosely here, of a optical display that feeds audiovisual data into you constantly, and you just get advertised through it pretty much nonstop. If you download the Cyborg Foundry integration that they've made, the thing literally comes with a bot pre-installed that rolls ads in the chat log constantly. And you can like slow it down or whatever, so it's not completely unbearable. But every few seconds to minutes, you'll hear a little bloop, and it'll be another ad that's popped up in your vision that is like flooding you with that oppressive dose of like constantly roiling information. It's fun. It's so good. It's bleak. It's real bleak. But it does have some really cool world building tools in there that are cross applicable. There's some mission generators in there that are cross applicable. Even the way it presents certain elements of the world and the corporations within it are very, very cross applicable. You can very easily find your way into using them as, if nothing more, reference material for the game you do want to run.
One of the other things also with like the City of Psy as well is you do get that mixture of either overcrowded or like sparse cyberpunk, but despite like how little context Stockholm Cartel gives you just enough context for each of those districts that you can draw up what you're looking for with it. So the City of Psy, like, it does kind of have a map, but we don't know exactly how big Psy is.
Yeah, contextually, Psy is very loose.
You are a drop in the ocean.
Yeah, when the boundaries and things there are drawn incredibly loosely. They're more of a kind of suggestion, I guess, and they're more philosophical than they are like hard physical lines like they would be in Night City. So you can play around a lot with some of the flexibility of that when you're using a world like that. The other cross reality that kind of it touches into, spoiler alert, everything in Cyborg is a simulation. So I'd be remiss to bring that up without then also bringing up the Matrix, in which nothing is real, everything is a simulation, and in many, many ways, you can do a lot with that. You can do a lot with that idea. If you want to get really crazy with it, doing something simulated for your players, without the dissatisfaction, of course, of just ending the campaign on the note, and it was all a dream, is like, if you can avoid ending the campaign that way, but making that like a beat within there, and suddenly you wake up to a stark, new, somehow more horrifying reality than the one you were fed before. God, that's so much fun. It's so cool to do that. I've done that to my players before, and it's such a good time.
I suppose, of course, as as I have covered a little bit on my channel, and it's probably one of like my favorite like secondary settings right behind Night City itself. we need to look at LA in Ridley Scott's universe. Well, the Blade Runner universe. I know Ridley Scott didn't do the second movie, but specifically the one we're gonna look at is Blade Runner set in 2037, which is like the time when the game the book has it set. And so LA itself is split into many different sectors, and like every sector has kind of its own personality, much like how Night City does. But this is kind of how I do like to paint my cities, where each one is going to be very each sector does have its own personality. Such as Sector 4, it's the industrial district. It's home to Wallace, which is basically the predecessor to Tyrell. DNA Row, where bioengineering happens.
Wallace is the successor to Tyrell.
Oh,
Tyrell
predecessor is before, yeah.
Tyrell,
which Tyrell's the Tyrell Corporation was once the biggest building in LA during Ridley Scott's movie. Somehow things got bigger. And what I like with how Tomas and the Free League crew painted this one, the higher up you go, the newer the buildings are, but the buildings are built on buildings that are built on buildings. So almost nothing is new until you get above, I think, like the 50th floor, and then maybe it might be new. And like you have Sector 5 itself, which is Little Tokyo is what it is. But you have the Arts District. You have a spot that's just dedicated to entertainment. And it is... I mean, hell, even LAX, which is become like the interstellar spaceport for Los Angeles, it's become its own sector. These places are very much defined by what they do. And it can really help you set the setting for, either a fight in an abandoned warehouse where you are, dodging between worn down machinery, shooting at, if we were to take it back to Night City, how do we apply this here? You're in the Haywood Industrial Zone in some old factory that has been decommissioned and still hasn't been bought by someone. You and your crew are dealing with, I don't know, insert gang here, or you're dealing with the cops who are trying to come, get you out of there. And you're dodging between this machinery, knowing that you could get hurt. Something might switch on. And it changes the tone compared to the rush of just bright signs, neon, everything yelling at you to buy this, come see this, all that shit, like what you would see like on the Vegas Strip. And one of the other things also is just, despite like having both crowded and sparse areas, LA still somehow manages to hold that noir vibe for the Blade Runner series, like when they're when you're working through cases, because you see like what you see in Cyberpunk for like where executives are. Turn that up to 11, and that's like what you'd see Neander Wallace sitting. For anyone who's watched 2049, we're talking about Neander Wallace's office that's got like just the water around the platform, or all the columns that lead up to it.
It's effectively a temple.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I mean, Neander does have a god complex now that you bring it up.
I mean, anyone like, I mean, even Tyrell's was very Temple-esque.
Oh, yeah.
Like in the first Blade Runner. So yeah, like anyone who can make life from nothing would have a god complex, because effectively you've done a thing that only God himself has been attributed to. You know, like, oh yeah, I made nothing into something. It breathes, it thinks, it operates, but only, of course, to the whims of the user. We haven't had any proven accidents, deaths, etc. from the Gen 9 Nexus line.
No, not at all. Nothing's happened.
Nothing.
But I suppose that again, LA was the inspiration. Was one of the inspirations for Mike's original cyberpunk back in the 80s. So the two kind of are, you know, distant cousins, you know, or maybe not so distant, but
no,
just enough of a difference.
If you look at the initial artistic renderings of Night City and its skyline and all of that, to talk very literally about that for a sec, it very, 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 very well resembles the visions of a cyberpunk city first presented in things like Blade Runner or Akira. Like all of that is very much like... Yeah, Ghost in the Shell to a certain degree as well. All of what cyberpunk was back then was very present in the initial like edition and second edition of cyberpunk. So that all kind of comes in part and parcel.
Yeah.
One of the franchises that I would like to bring up, because this is something that we have most all the context we need to do it, but no one has, at least no one I've seen, other than like I did it for one of my campaigns as sort of our like climax beat of the campaign, is Astropunk. We have the Crystal Palace. We have a bunch of other floating orbital stations that are, we know, by and large owned by, or at the very least controlled and secured by the High Riders. High Rider Society is, I think, a criminally underexplored element of Cyberpunk Red's lore to this point. And if we wanted to look at another media franchise that you could shape a campaign on that, kind of built to examine what it's like if you didn't live on Earth itself, would be to look at The Expanse, which I know many of the people that work at Artel also have a very deep love for. And I could very easily see why when I started digging into that. The Expanse is awesome. And it very much is like street level cyberpunk when you take it into orbit and you start dealing with some of the ways in which large corporations or governments play power games with one another, and the little people that are either blue collar workers or just regular people that are the wrong place, the wrong time, how those people get then brought into those agendas and the conflicts that then ensue because of them. And that is something that very easily could be told. And it makes a lot of things like netrunning even more interesting, because those air gap networks maybe weren't as tightly shut off from the pre-war nets that we largely lost in the data crash. Because how do you keep long loop communications open with like the Martian colonies? How do you deal with, space flight communications? You need connectedness of some kind. And there's a lack of ability to really like modify those things by and large to play nice where that's concerned, if you want to keep your efficiencies and things like that, which as we all know, corporations are all too happy to make that sacrifice of security for their convenience.
I know this one's a little bit out there of a stretch, and I know we had mentioned it earlier, but I feel like it is worth bringing up, especially because of like what happened to Chicago in Cyberpunk 2020.
Yeah.
So, for context, Chicago suffered was it 2020 or was it somewhere in the gap?
I think it was in the gap, but it's it's around the time of the Fourth Corporate War.
So what happens is Chicago suffers a bioplague, a very deadly bioplague that wipes out a lot of the population, and it caused like any rebuilding efforts to just crumble. And it created a terrible mess. Like, it was devastating for the city to the point that we don't know if Chicago is still functional. We don't know what Chicago is doing right now. And actually, let me see what we got here. Executive branch.
Yeah, like, I don't
Where's
think...
the timeline?
It's, I think, Welcome to the Dark Future is the chapter. Let me...
Yeah, yep. So, it happened. So the wipeout happens. And... Let's see, it's in 20... Diaspora... Okay, so it happens in the 2030s is what happens.
Yeah,
okay.
That's kind of was like, I thought it was in the in-between. But the bottom line here is that when that happens, there very likely were people who survived, or at the bare minimum, maybe moved in the aftermath, right? Once the plague had quieted and died off.
Chicago rebuilding project collapses. Oh, in 2024. Okay, there it is. Found it.
Yeah. So just after the Fourth Corporate War.
Yeah. But Emmerron reintroduced me into a series that I hadn't picked up just because like life was busy until now. It's called The Division. I don't know if it really needs much of an introduction because it is. I mean, Division 2 is very popular, but in the events of the Division 1, we watch what a narcissistic or
I mean, an
like,
egomaniacal bioscientist that literally just like engineers the worst hybridization. Basically, he's like, here is smallpox as a base, which we all know is like awful, right? In and of itself, it is awful. So he takes smallpox and says, well, what if I combined this with other plagues, like, bubonic plague, threw a little bit of influenza in there, Ebola, like hybridize it to the point that it expresses all the worst qualities of each of these things, and then make it hyper transmissible. And it basically, in Division 1, we see it, I think, 2 weeks in. To the plague beginning to really unfold, and at this time it's largely being called the dollar flu, and it is because the first signs of it came up after Black Friday, where several bills were spiked with the virus by this asshole, and the Division is like a sleeper group that gets activated by the US government, who have extrajudicial authority essentially to go out, fix the problems as flexibly as they need to, and deal with the malfeasance that are looking to capitalize on the chaos essentially. And the first game largely takes place within New York.
Specifically Manhattan.
Yeah, within Manhattan itself.
To my 2 New York followers, you're welcome.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah. It's important. The tutorial is in Brooklyn. The rest of it takes place in Manhattan.
They get at some of my fans from up there kind of get after me if I don't specify what part of New York.
I mean, it's fair. It's a giant ass city. I don't really blame them for being sensitive to it. Because it's funny because Phoenix and New York kind of have that weirdly in common, where it's like you could say you're from Phoenix to anyone beyond the metro, and they're like, oh yeah, if they don't know Phoenix, they're like, oh, you're from Phoenix, very cool. When you live here, though, you know that Phoenix is not that big in and of itself, but it bleeds into like a dozen other cities that are all distinctly, like, they've got their own mayors, they've got their own, councils, they've got everything that a regular town or city would have, and yet they all touch in the middle. You cross one street over into the next, or cross over a highway, and that is the border between the cities. And if you don't know that it's there, or don't notice the street signs change their styling, it's completely different. So yeah, like I can at the very least relate to New Yorkers where that's concerned, because it's maybe not quite the same way, because I think, where we have multiple cities here, theirs is still just one, with each of the kind of districts or boroughs within the city being their own kind of more like strict to loosely defined areas and places that have their own kinds of communities and things like that. So I can understand why you get picky about that, because a lot of us are like, yeah, you might say you're from Phoenix, but if you're from like Santan Valley, you're way the fuck down in the middle of a cornfield for the most part. You're not in Phoenix proper.
You guys have corn out here?
Yeah.
Damn! I can't escape it!
We could go for a drive sometime. I will show you where the cornfields are.
I cannot escape the cornfields. They keep following me.
Corn and cotton. We grow them both out here for some reason.
But also on top of that, you see like society break off into some different major factions, like even in DC, where you have like in New York you have the rioters, which to us that would be the booster gangs going out and taking advantage of hey, there's no cops, there's very few of them, and there's a lot of us.
Yeah.
You got Rikers, which are, from the Rikers Island prison complex, which bunch of very angry people that got out and are, taking it out on the world. Yep. Like it, owes them something. And then you have the Cleaners, which, I feel the Reckoners and...
they're the working people of New York City who just saw a problem and they saw cleansing it with fire as a solution.
I mean, fire is the great cleaner, as they say, but but it's like Inquisitors and Reckoners.
They're kind of in line with that. The sycophancy definitely is on the same level as like a Reckoner or an Inquisitor. They're a little more principled in the way that they are like going around, because their idea is, well, the virus doesn't survive fire. So if we burn the places in the city, rather than trying to do this whole, we're going to cordon it off and put a bunch of like plastic sheeting over it, and then we're gonna get things out of there bit by bit and decontaminate them. They just said, fuck it, burn it. And that it's so much simpler. We don't have to go through all this bureaucratic bullshit. It is extremely a like anarchistic blue collar approach to
it's a very heavy-handed approach.
It is. It's a very heavy-handed approach, but it's simplistic. It's incredibly simplistic. Doesn't give a fuck about what the long-term effects or impacts of it are. Just that in the short term, we burn it and the virus doesn't survive. Which is horrifying.
And then, like in DC, we have the hyenas, which is basically what happens when all the booster gangers decide, hey, we need to work together to deal with this other gang, which is basically the Red Chrome Legion, which we get the True Sons, which Army General decides that the government isn't doing enough. So he and his people decide to break off to go do their own thing and become this very fascist group, which we also see that with the Last Man Battalion, which is corporations hired them to protect their assets when the plague happened. Then the corporations pulled out, so Last Man Battalion just kind of took over neighborhoods of the city, which become very fascist groups that run everything with an iron fist. And then let's see, what else do we have in Division? Like, what other groups do we have?
Well, then you've got
the Outcasts.
Yeah, because the Outcasts are much more like the Reckoners. Similarly to the Cleaners, they burn everything in their path. But for them, it's more. They're more terroristic than they are trying to fix the problem. If anything, they're trying to make it worse because they feel spurned by society. Because initially, they were formed by a woman named Emmeline Shaw, who was taken from her child early on in the pandemic and left on Roosevelt Island with a bunch of others that suffered a very similar fate. And when push came to shove, Emmeline just was not having it. So she gathered the people together and formed an uprising. And basically now their whole thing is, you made our lives hell. We're going to make yours a hell 10 times worse than what we went through. And we went through awful things. We saw people die. We saw people burned. We saw people killed because there merely were suspicions that they were infected with the plague. We are going to visit all of this tenfold upon all of you. And they're scary. They're really scary. Of all the factions in the division, they're the ones that actually frighten me the most.
And then there's Black Tusk, which Black Tusk is very much like PMC with government backing, that secret government backing.
Yep.
Militech.
Yeah, they're very much like a Blackwater type of group, which is very much like, you have this group take contracts totally clandestine, and like then when shit hits the fan and all of a sudden the division is starting to get like an idea of like, okay, we have samples of the virus, we've developed enough knowledge of a vaccine that if we got some broad spectrum antiviral stuff, we could form a vaccine and use that to start curing people and preventing the plague from gaining further footholds. Black Tusk shows up. They're like, except what if it was only the people who were powerful and in control of everything that had the power to determine that? What about that? And it's very much like, we have all the power. You small people shouldn't have it. You should do something stupid like make a utopia out of that or something. And so it's very much like they're more like the Last Man Battalion in a lot of ways, where it's like they're just hired by the powerful people and they are given the toys and budgets to match. And it's like, okay, like here's the massive corporate backed paramilitary.
Which you might be wondering, well, Diamond, what the fuck does this have to do with like the Skyline? The Skyline's built off the street and the people that walk around on it. And sometimes you got to give your, like, so like even between Emmerron and I, our gangs have, slightly different flavors to, how they do things. Where, my 6th Street group, they have like, a very welcoming front end, But the further you peel back the onion, the worse it gets.
Yeah. For me, they're a bunch of like angry jarheads is kind of the way I portray them by and large.
Oh yeah.
Because that's kind of what they are, and they're in a fairly desperate place when we meet them in the red. Whereas by the 70s, I mean, they are all washed up.
They're just another gang.
They're just another gang. They wear, you know, the cyberware of their service, and you know, make a claim for themselves that this somehow places them better than other denizens of the city, but they're just another gang with just a different brand of gang colors and, you know, the codes or creeds that align them to a cause very loosely.
Well, we are coming up on the hour, I suppose. Do we have any questions for Q&A? Time for me to go into Discord to see if I got anything.
I don't believe I have any. Let me... Because I can at least look at my...
Oh. And this one, I feel, doesn't require like a lot of conversation if we're willing to bleed out just a little bit. Deus Ex and Nanopunk.
Yeah. I mean, Nanopunk exists.
Basically, with Deus Ex, what we're seeing is basically the haves and the haves and have-nots getting divided down two different sides. People that are all about, you know, yes, let's allow for augmentations to happen. One side's like, no, we do not do augmentations around here. And that's another way that you can really help, like, paint how you know, people feel about, like, depending on what neighborhoods you're in. It's either like people might be really about cyberware, or you might be in other neighborhoods where it's just like, cover your chrome. It might get ripped out of you if you aren't watching your back.
Right. Yeah. And it's very much a like case in Deus Ex's universe of like, people take the threat of sort of inbuilt cyber psychosis, that universe's equivalent thereof, very seriously. As they take it as a deeply existential threat. Whereas like in Cyberpunk, it's kind of become an accepted part of living everyday life. Yeah. The world of Deus Ex is still very, very deeply entrenched in the techno shock of it. Which is like, honestly, if you're trying to cook a campaign that takes place in the 30s or something like that, where like the next generation of cyberware is now just become developed by someone like Rockland, or if you're starting to bridge into like the 70s, like you're looking into the 50s or the 60s and looking at Gen 3 cyberware and the Neuroport and all of that, you could tell a very analogous story, I am sure, in the right communities and contexts to the one that Deus Ex tries to tell. Because you have this group of people that are like, what do you mean it can like connect to everything around me and like augment my senses? There's absolutely going to be some people who, much like me in the modern day, and like, if it is a smart device, I don't really want it in my house. I don't want a Ring doorbell. I don't want like a smart like thermostat. I don't want cameras. I don't want an Alexa. I don't want any of that shit. All of it listens. All of it is hackable. None of it secures me. I'm very much of that mindset.
The giant corporations don't have our best interests in mind. How could you tell me such a thing that might break my worldview?
Well, that's what I'm here
Damn.
to do. That's my job. So,
what the fuck, man?
Looking at it through that lens, like Deus Ex is very much that when you take that logic and apply it to cyberware, and you very well can turn that in. When the Neuroport comes out, they're like, yeah, it links all your cyberware, but what the fuck do you think will happen when everything that connects out gets connected back? What happens? And then you could tell the story of the first quick hacks and stuff like that, which is in and of itself a horrifying epoch to live through.
I have received a very interesting question from Fish.
Please.
All right, so my friend Fish asks...
Is it sandwich related?
No, it actually has nothing to do with a sandwich.
Beautiful. Please continue.
Wow, okay. Damn!
Fish's name gets constantly invoked on sandwiches when we interview people, so I just need to check.
I mean, look, I'm just simply doing a solid for my buddy here, okay?
No, fair. No. I'm just gonna... I rib you lightly, Fish. We appreciate you submitting, but please, give me the actual question. I just had to talk shit for 5 seconds.
So Fish asks, how can I make little bits of technology intrusive in my cyberpunk setting?
So,
which I feel really leans more towards the overcrowded. Fish does overcrowded cyberpunk.
Yeah, that's overcrowded. It's very much you're dealing it whenever things can be intrusive that way. You're very likely dealing with the surveillance state and the people who are trying to use it, not just from the government side to look at people and enforce their laws or their agenda or whatever. You're also looking at the rogue agents like netrunners, like the Voodoo Boys, other kind of criminal or pseudo criminal organizations that would manipulate it and exploit it for their ends. That's all deeply crowded cyberpunk. That's where you there was an exercise one of my high school English teachers had us do when we were reading through 1984 that forever changed my perspective on the world, which is the way my high school is laid out. Just to give you a quick mental image here, is it was a kind of a terraced campus that kind of slowly sloped downward towards where the students would park, those of us who were upperclassmen. So as you looked back from the parking lot, you kind of looked up almost this stair step or ramp of buildings. And so our teacher challenged us. This was Mr. Beisel, Mr. John Beisel, one of the best teachers I ever had. May he rest in peace. He told us, when you walk outside today for lunch, because a bunch of us, it was our last class before we went to lunch, said, turn around and look at how many cameras you can see on the school. And in doing that, listening to him and acknowledging what he was saying, I saw exactly in that moment how many cameras there were that I'd never thought of before. If you do that, I challenge you, when you enter buildings and things like that, not in a creepy way, don't pretend you're going to do anything nefarious, but look for where the cameras are. Look for the little domed bits on the ceiling that are just concealed cameras. Right. Look for surveillance cams out on the street. If you look around and look for cameras, you will see so many more cameras than you first thought were there.
When you decided to go to the department store, just look.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obvious. Diamond, you got to be able to watch all the aisles. But as someone who has worked in a little bit of retail security, there you see some cameras.
You don't see all of them.
You don't see all of them.
And there's a lot.
I even struggle to see a lot of them.
Yeah.
Because, there's cameras watching the meat department. There's cameras watching this department. But then there's cameras on the shelves. Yep. There's cameras in the back room. Yep. There's a camera watching the cargo elevators, the parking lot, the back alley, delivery bay. There's cameras everywhere. There's audio devices listening in places. Hell, one of the places that I go to weekly, they, just because, they want to make sure people are minding the code of conduct in the private rooms, they make it known that, hey, we film and record everything that goes down in the room.
Yep.
And it's okay.
As they should.
But I suppose other things, isn't it just a little uncomfortable when Continental Brands recommends, it puts out that advertisement of, buy one bag, get a second bag off of your favorite flavor of kibble right when you're walking by the Oasis? Or just so happens that, right when you're about to do something dangerous, you get an advertisement for a trauma team subscription, or
That's one of my favorite. The agent thinks you might be about to do something very stupid. Let me make that clear to you in the most subtle way I can.
Your agent thinks about it.
Yeah, your agent has an idea here. Maybe it'd be a good time to subscribe to Trauma Team, because that way, if you really fuck this up, at least they can scrape your ass off the pavement afterward and have something to deliver to what few loved ones you have left.
Isn't it just a little weird that, every time your agent orders clothes, they perfectly fit, even if your body has changed a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Get in their heads. Make the psyop happen.
One of my favorites. So there's a really obvious, not obvious, but like a really overt way you can do this, and your players the first time you do this will probably be pissed off, right? I know mine were the first time I did this. Like, what the fuck? We covered our asses. We did this, that, and the other thing. I'm like, yes, but not all of the things that you did it wasn't comprehensive. There were other things, other cameras, other listening devices. There were people there that you did not see. So the first time the corporation comes for them, that because they hit a corporation comes for them and says, so we know what you did, and so you're going to help us solve this problem, and then we can forget about this ever happening. And if you refuse, this gets much worse for you right now, and we will show you exactly what we mean by that. And out steps 4 well-armed, armored guards with rifles pointed at the edge runners' heads. So that's the really overt way you do it. The really covert way you do this is kind of similar to what Diamond's saying. You slowly insert little things that are just like obvious suggestive marketing. The really fun thing you do, though, is make a note of when players are having a private conversation, but they've taken no effort to remove their agents from the room or search it for listening devices. And then, like, a session or two later, give them time to have forgotten about the conversation, throw them an ad, or throw them something related to that their agent says, you might find this headline interesting. And it's something they never told their agent. They never told anyone other than maybe the one person they were talking to. And all of a sudden now they're going to get paranoid as fuck overnight, because now they're like, what do you mean my agent knows about that? Why was my agent listening? I wasn't asking my agent. I didn't even look at the data pool for that. What do you mean it knows what I'm doing?
Well, it's got to know it's got to know what you want. Take care of your lifestyle for you.
Well, yeah. Well, and that's
your agent is there to help you.
And then all of a sudden, this is why it becomes covert, right? They'll start leaving their agent in another room. And all of a sudden, one day, their agent gets just a little bit of sentience, by which I mean, owner, am I no longer useful? It will ask them a question. And they will fucking hate that. They will run. They will feel, they're like, I'm taking that thing, I'm throwing it in the fucking river. I'm not doing that. Nope. Absolutely not.
Well, and then there's, of course, you did something and you're pretty sure the other corporation doesn't know about it. But then suddenly, right next door, some people that work for that corporation move in. Mm-hmm. And they just happen to take care of some trespassers that were trying to get into your house. Mm-hmm. And they definitely don't know that you took something that belonged to their corporation. Not at all.
Nope.
Running a good psyop on your players using tech is very useful. Also, another way to do it, just maybe that vendit just happens to know this player comes by all the time. It happens to just have that specific thing that player is going to need.
Play Brendan in the most kind of comfortably malicious way possible. By which I mean, like, if you know Brendan from 2077, he is everyone's favorite little sub character that pops up.
Brendan is a great schism.
Brendan is the best sentient little vending machine. And there comes a point where Brendan mentions something extremely personal and very like, what the fuck? Where did you get that from? And it very much either alludes or it might even directly call out to V being on death's door or having died already. It's like, but V, you're already dead. And it says it in the most joyful way possible.
Yes.
And it's like, Brendan, what the actual fuck is this? That is not, no. Nuh-uh.
The first time that
okay.
happened to me, I screamed.
Oh,
I screamed.
No. It's terrifying, and that's what you want to do to your players is elicit that response from them of like, I'm sorry, what?
I don't know if any of my players are watching this. I have a vendit. I have someone that likes to go to one of the combat zone vendits to go get grenades. And it started off with armor piercing grenades, okay, or a tear gas grenade.
Mm-hmm.
Then it turned into no, it went from tear gas. It went to okay. Well, I don't have tear gas grenades today. Would you like to try smoke grenades? Oh, sure. Yes. Yeah. That'll work. I don't have any smoke grenades, but I have armor piercing grenades. These, you don't have to hide from your enemies anymore. You can just get rid of them. No, this isn't boomer culture. This is not boomer. This is someone else.
Oh my gosh.
I put a rogue AI in a vendit. That just kind of wants to watch people just devolve. So now we're at armor piercing grenades, and I'm thinking shuriken tornado grenades next. Just knives. Just fucking knives.
So you've been buying armor piercing grenades from me for some time now, and I just wanted to let you know about a brand new item. Just got it in stock, and it's better. It's even better than your standard armor piercing grenade with freshly stoned, honed bits of metal from the Midwest Cutlery Company, the Shuriken Tornado. And unlike the regular armor piercing grenade, which simply shatters the armor, what if you could shatter the body? And not in the messy, it becomes mist. No, fine. Surgical, some might even say.
Death by 1,000 cuts, as they say. And then also one of the other ones I had, of course, is just another way to really just get to them a little bit. And be careful about this, because some players, it may be something very particular. I put gotcha in Elflines Online because, of course, maybe you decide to pick up one of the companion NPCs, and your agent's gonna let you know, hey, your companion is looking for this, or your companion is looking for this. It's how I've been kind of slowly bleeding money out of a couple of my players. And one of them was just like, all right, Diamond, I just need to let you know, do you know something about me that I don't think I've ever told you? I'm like, well, no. I'm sorry, did I cross the boundary? I'm like, well, no, you didn't. I'm like, oh, okay, all right, I'm sorry.
All of a sudden you discover the gotcha addict in your midst. That's...
Meanwhile, there they are with like a whole case of Pokemon cards they got to go open after session. I'm like,
so quick side story, because this is relevant when you mention Pokemon. I did not realize that today is restock day for one of the local shops near me, where they also happen to have a pharmacy. So I'm in there picking up meds for my cat. And I walk in and I see this line, and I mean like this is a big store. It's one of the big box stores. I'm not going to say which because I don't want to dox myself, but this line starts here and it runs like 3 aisles back. And then I notice they've got one of those like kind of strap bollards set up right by the head of a trading card aisle. And this whole group had gathered because it looked like they were stocking the Pokemon cards. And as I walked by, I literally shook my head because I had to walk past them to get to the pharmacy. And I'm like, this is fucking ridiculous. It's crazy. It is crazy. And I say this as someone who has played trading card games for most of my life. That shit is nuts. That is insane.
All I can think of now is just like Costco or Sam's Club, just restock day, just a whole fucking pallet right there.
I was about
Do
to
you
say,
know how insane that would be?
No. Have you seen the Costco? There are Costco videos of them doing this, and the people who come in to like.
No.
Oh, I've got videos to show you later then, Diamond.
All right. Well, I think on that note, unless I have any other questions here, I think. Oh, I have received another question.
Yeah, let's get this last one.
Mud, I didn't know you watched the podcast, but hi.
Mud, I've heard some stories. Good things, I promise. It's great.
What? No, you're not Mud. I was like, did Mud just respond? Like, no, you're not Mud.
No,
Anyway,
no.
Mud does ask. What would drug culture be looking like in an overpopulated setting?
Wow.
And my first thought was immediately like when we were watching Interstate 60.
Yeah.
With the Euphoria.
That's so. Yeah, there's a couple ways you could take that. So any of you who have not seen the fever dream film classic that is Interstate 60, welcome. Your mental space has been tainted by my wife's favorite film, so you're welcome. There is a town in that film where they literally have a rave at the center of the town every single night, and they serve very openly and freely a drug called Euphoria that the moment you take it, you're pretty much guaranteed to be addicted, and withdrawal can mean death, like even after just a dose or two. But they warn you on giant signs, in the radio broadcasts, and anything that you consume there in media, there are warnings. Warning, Euphoria is highly addictive. It is not recommended that you consume Euphoria. And yet they have a whole town of people who are willing to take this drug, and they literally use them as laborers within the town. They subsidize their labor force because they've said, yeah, all people want to do is get high. And so we, our birth rates fucking fell. Our labor force dried up. We had no productive adults kind of in the town. Everyone was just getting high. So we came up with a solution where we just made the most addictive drug known to man and then distributed that freely. And now we have a labor force because no one's going to say no to another dose as payment. And they just work off the debt that they owe the city for these drugs and the rave that we throw for them every single night by just doing the small things.
And to the people who might be wondering, no, that did not inspire what Red Genesis was. Red Genesis, I wrote this before I watched Interstate 60.
No, Red Genesis, like Diamond's been talking to me a little bit here and there about Red Genesis for months. And she just saw this maybe 2 weeks ago. So like this is very fresh in the zeitgeist.
Yeah. Like, well.
Yeah.
But yeah. So
that's one way you could do it.
Another way it could really be like, and of course there's the piranhas where, their business is your pleasure. Drugs. Alcohol. Just that is the piranhas are just a corporation in a neon leather jacket is what they are.
A little bit, yeah. Well, in some ways
to now have child labor, which
in some ways they are like euphoria distributors in their own right, which is very much they don't care. Like if you've gotten addicted at one of their parties, they still throw the parties all the time. They're the most effective recruiting tool, and they don't care who you are, you know, what your background is. They don't care what your parents told you when you were a kid. Maybe you're not even fully an adult yet. They don't care. You want drugs? That is what Night City's drug culture is largely defined by, is groups like the Piranhas, but also to the more ethical side of that culture, one might argue, would be small shops like Breeze, which we see in Woodland Park. They are literally a mom and pop drug store, very literal drug store that sells just about any drug you could want that they make. And they look like this very nice old couple, and they deal in just about every substance known under the sun.
They care about how you get high.
They do care about how you get high. So that would be, as far as distribution, that's kind of how distribution would be handled. Mm-hmm. As far as like intoxicating yourself and like how that would be viewed, you know, depends on your drug, depends on how you're using them. Some people use synth coke just to get high as hell. Some people use it as a combat drug.
I mean, Olivia Forsyth, CEO of Continental Brands, has a known synth coke addiction.
Yep.
Another exec that we see that's from Continental Brands also has a synth coke addiction. My exec from Continental Brands does not have a synth coke addiction.
Yet. She does not have a synth coke addiction yet.
No, she has a drinking problem.
Oh, anyway, that's true.
She can't hold her liquor.
Oh, where have I seen this one before?
It's like I put a part of me in her. Mind you, folks, I fell out of my chair last night after 2 shots of vodka. All right.
Yeah.
Yes. Be responsible, folks. I don't have any other questions. You don't have any other questions?
Nope.
What are we thinking?
And we're pretty much there, I think, in terms of time. So, those of you who are here with us live on Twitch, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. We really appreciate you. If you're watching this on Spotify, of course, you will have gotten the story from the very beginning, starting with Diamond's part of the episode, through to now where I am ending mine. If you are over on YouTube, however, and you have only seen this half of the episode, which is mine on my channel, Diamond has her part, the first half of today's episode, over on hers. There is a link down in the description below this video that you can click on if you'd like to see that. I highly recommend you do. It's where we talk more directly to the cyberpunk red side of today's topic, and less about kind of some related media and works that we feel could lend some additional reference material or layers, especially if you're building something beyond Night City itself. But as always, guys, I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, or afternoon wherever you are in the world. Stay healthy, stay safe, and until we see you again, peace, guys.
Bye.